G'day everyone. So I want to talk to you today about managing conflicts of interest during a tender process. Hi, it's Simon Zarifa here from Shrewd. We provide commercial support to the Commonwealth to help the Commonwealth successfully deliver value for money projects. So conflicts of interest and managing them. So what is a conflict of interest? Well, it's an interest that arises when an official has an affiliation or interest that could affect their impartiality. That is the theory. So if an official has a reason or a potential bias not to do something because they stand to gain materially, as in make money, etc., then they have a conflict of interest. Now, officials must be mindful of a potential conflict of interest that could arise, and they must not seek to gain some sort of benefit from their position. So that is the standard APS text, and that is obvious. And so how does that relate to procurements? Well, I'm going to come to that shortly, but the key concept here is you've got to be mindful that they do exist, but you're not allowed to benefit from your position. And so quite rightfully, the Department of Finance has said, look, conflicts of interest will arise because that's just how it is. And so this is not about completely avoiding the conflict of interest, but rather working out ways to appropriately manage that conflict of interest. So the key fundamental point here is that you should strive to avoid the conflict of interest and what could be also perceived to be a conflict of interest. And that is what you should do at first instance, if I can speak, is that you should look to eliminate the actual potential or perceived conflict of interest. So how does that usually work practically in a procurement context? Well, usually all members of the tender evaluation team will be asked to sign a conflict of interest declaration. And that conflict of interest declaration sets out any conflicts of interest, pretty obvious, that they would or do have in relation to that evaluating that relevant project. Now you need to do that because that conflict of interest will then inform the impartiality that that individual brings to the table or not, as the case may be. So you create your tender evaluation team. They are the people that are going to evaluate your tenders. You ask them to sign a conflict of interest form. Actually, you probably want to get them to sign a confidentiality agreement as well. But they sign their conflict of interest form. They send those forms back to the relevant procurement or probity advisor or potentially even legal advisor who analyzes the conflict of interest forms, sees if there are any conflicts of interest, and if there are, and if there is also the potential for there to be a conflict of interest, so not necessarily an actual conflict of interest, but a potential one as well, then the easiest way is to try and eliminate that, which in this case would be to ask the relevant tender evaluation team member to step aside, i.e. sack them from evaluating your tender. They're probably not going to be unhappy about that, to be honest, because there is a lot of work involved in evaluating a tender. So that would be step one. If there is a potential conflict of interest and there is a reason or potential bias that a member may show when evaluating tenders, because let's say they have shares in the company, significant shares in the company that's being evaluated, then you probably want to get them off the tender evaluation team. Now, as finance has said, is that conflicts of interest will arise. It's just a matter of how you can manage them, right? So that is an effective way. But obviously, before you can manage something, you need to know they exist. So that's why you go and get the conflict of interest forms filled out. You are entitled to rely on them, meaning if someone has lied and you don't know that they've lied, well, you're still entitled to rely on the documents that they have put forward. Now, if it turns out that they have lied, then as soon as you become aware of that, then you need to take steps to do something. But you are entitled to rely on the forms as being appropriately and correctly filled out. So you get your conflict of interest forms, you evaluate whether there are actually any conflicts. If there are any curly ones, you send them to your legal or probity advisor. They will then give you the advice about whether the relevant person should stay on the tender evaluation team or not. And once again, bear in mind that you want to avoid actual conflicts of interest, and also potential or perceived conflicts of interest, meaning how would it look if someone else became aware that this person had disclosed this conflict of interest, yet they were still involved in the tender evaluation process. So the most risk-averse way of doing that is to ask the tender evaluation person who has the potential conflict or the actual conflict to stand aside and not be involved. Pretty simple. So that is an effective way of managing conflicts of interest. You can do other things as well, but they're a little complicated in the sense that they are very scenario or the potential solutions are based on the exact factual scenario that is in question. So I won't try and bore you with those at the moment. But there you have it. If you have any questions or queries, feel free to get in touch. Simon@shrewd.com.au or 1-800-SHREWD, which is 1-800-747-393. Hope that helps someone out there.